everyone, welcome to my channel, or welcome back to my channel. If you don't know me, my name is Victoria. You can call me Vic. And today I'm doing things a little bit different. Because it is the Halloween season, I thought I would sit down and share some of my paranormal experiences, my paranormal stories that I've had in my life. I feel like I've actually had kind of a decent number of paranormal experiences. I think most people within their lifespan will have at least one paranormal experience, but I will be sharing it from the maybe less scary part of the spectrum up into the more scary part of the spectrum, or I guess more impactful for me as I experienced it. All right, so starting off, when I was about 4 or 5 years old, I lived with my mom and my brother Chris in this house. My mom would go to my room to check on me, and she would find me playing by myself, talking out loud like I was speaking to someone. So of course she would come over to me and be like, well, who are you talking to? Expecting me to say it was an imaginary friend or my stuffed animals. And instead I would tell her that I was playing with the old woman. And she was very much freaked out by this, as you can imagine. And she would ask me, what old woman? Like, what are you talking about? And I would just say, it's the old woman. She's really nice. I've been playing with her. And I would do it multiple times to the point where my mom was fully convinced that I was talking to a spirit of some kind. Now, I don't think she was like that concerned about it because she was just playing with me. No other weird stuff was happening in the house. And I would say my mom is very open to paranormal things, not necessarily like she wants it to happen, but she believes in paranormal stuff. So I think in her mind, she was just like, okay, like this old woman spirit's playing with my daughter, and she was just fine with it. But in hindsight, as I got older and we started talking about the experience, we realized that we had had a neighbor who lived next door who was an older woman, and she did unfortunately die while we were living there. When she was alive, she was really nice to me. She would gift me things, and she had this beautiful garden that she would let me play in. But when we were thinking about it, my mom fully believes now that it was our old neighbor who was coming to play with me. Now, that's the only story I have where I don't necessarily remember things, but I just had to mention it because it's such an interesting story from my perspective. I know when I was a kid that I was seeing ghosts and playing with ghosts. Now, moving on to my next story, I am a lot older in this one. This was when I was in high school. At the time, I was living with my dad and my stepmom, and we lived in this really small town, like population less than 300 people, in this log cabin that my dad had built himself in the middle of the woods. Now, this was a really isolated house. From our house, you couldn't see the main road. You couldn't see your neighbors. We were completely in solitude in this house. I'd never had any negative experiences in this house or anywhere on the land, really. But one night I was going to bed. I was the first of my family to go to bed. And as I was laying down, my dog, Tater, she started to walk down the hallway to come into bed with me. Usually she would kind of lounge around with me while my parents were still up and doing stuff, and then would leave once my parents went to bed. So Tater jumps up on the bed, and she's doing the little dog thing where she circles around, and then she just freezes. And I'm watching her, and slowly the hackles on her back just raise up. And she's staring at the spot that's in between my door and the wall. It was just enough space that maybe one person could have stood there. And I looked over, and it was completely dark. I had all the lights off in my room, and I didn't see anything, but she was slowly getting more and more agitated and angry and clearly afraid. She started to growl and bare her teeth, and then was barking. And at this point, I was freaked out because I couldn't see anything, but she was seeing something very clearly behind my door. And I will say at this point, I wasn't sure if this was paranormal or if there was actually a person that was standing behind the door that I just couldn't see because of how dark it was. So I immediately called out for my dad. I was too scared to get out of bed because I didn't know what it was. And he comes in, turns the lights on, and there's nothing behind the door. But at this point, I was still a little bit freaked out, and our dog was still not really letting it go. Like, she wasn't barking anymore, but she seemed very uneasy and didn't really want to go into my room anymore. Now, I didn't have any other experiences while I was in that house, and eventually I did move out, and my parents do still live in that house. They, as far as I know, haven't experienced anything, so I don't know if it was just a one-time fluke with my dog who thought she saw something, if it was a spirit passing by or what, but it really genuinely freaked me out. All right, now we're moving into the more serious, more impactful stories, which both happened when I was in college. So this first one happened when I was a junior in college. I lived in a 3-bedroom apartment complex with my best friend and one other roommate, and we each had our own bedrooms and our own bathrooms. I believe at this point we had been there for a few months. I feel like it was winter time and nothing had really happened. I didn't have any bad vibes for the apartment. You know, we were really enjoying our time there. But one night while I was sleeping, I was woken up by this voice, and I couldn't tell what the voice was because it stopped as soon as I woke up. And it really jarred me, and at first I thought maybe it was one of my roommates, but when I looked outside my bedroom, nobody was there, no one was awake, and it was completely silent. So I went back to bed thinking maybe it was an upstairs neighbor or a noise outside, and just as I started to fall back asleep, I hear the the noise again, and it's this loud voice, and I realize it's my Google Home. And I don't remember the exact words, but it was saying something along the lines of, the mic is turned off. If you want to make a request, turn the mic back on. And I kind of froze and was thinking for a moment, because I used my Google Home all the time to like ask it questions about the weather or to play music, whatever. And so I was really confused by why it was saying that the mic was off and why it was doing it so suddenly in the middle of the night. So I get up and I go over to my Google Home, and sure enough, the mic is turned off, which is pretty weird considering, as I said, I use it all the time and I hadn't turned the mic off. I was like, you know what, maybe I did, I forgot about it, maybe I bumped it. And so I turned the mic back on, set it back on my desk, and then go back into bed. But before I can even start to fall asleep again, the noise goes off again, and it's saying the same thing. The mic is turned off. If you want to make a request, turn it back on. And at this point, I'm feeling very freaked out, feeling very paranoid, because I just turned the mic back on. I don't really know why it keeps making this noise, why it keeps doing this. And I get up again and I look, and the mic is switched back off. And at this point, I am thoroughly freaked out because I know I turned the mic back on, and yet it's turned back off again, and it's making the same noise again. And so I was completely done at this point. I was freaked out. It was the middle of the night. Everyone's asleep. Everything's dark, which makes it so much worse. And so I just unplugged the Google Home. I was like, you know what? I'm not going to deal with it. I'm just going to unplug it and then call it good. And in the back of my head, I was definitely thinking, like, is this something? Like, is this like a ghost moment? Is this just technology freaking out? Is someone trying to hack into my Google Home? There was a lot of thoughts going through my head at this point, so I just unplugged it. But even when I went back to lay in bed, I felt very uncomfortable. I kind of felt like something was watching me, but at this point, I kept telling myself I was just being paranoid because I was associating what happened with the Google Home with it being paranormal. But my cat Pumpkin, at the time, she was in the room with me, and she wasn't acting like anything was wrong. She didn't seem scared. So I kept telling myself, you know, it's just paranoia. It's fine. So I turned on my bedroom TV until I was able to fall asleep. Now, flash forward about a month or so, we have an upstairs neighbor who lived above us. I can't remember her name, but we can just call her Haley for now. And me and my best friend were walking back up the steps because we lived on the second floor when we heard this crashing noise and found Haley unconscious at the base of the stairs. We're not really sure what happened because she lost a little bit of her memory, but she somehow fell down the stairs, and we ended up calling 911, and they came and she got taken to the hospital. Now, Haley was okay, but when she came back, she knocked on our door to thank us and just to talk to us and let us know that she was all right. Now, what started out as a really short I'm okay conversation turned into this hours-long discussion, and during our talk, she actually told us about how she believes that her apartment upstairs is haunted. Now, I still remembered this incident pretty clearly even a month later, even though nothing new had happened, and so I asked her to talk a little bit more about it. Now, keep in mind, she's our upstairs neighbor. Her apartment is directly above ours. So Haley sits and she tells us how she just always felt a little bit weird in her apartment, like something was watching her, but it was the worst in her bedroom. And she said recently, every time she would go to sleep, she would have these vivid nightmares, and one night she got sleep paralysis and woke up and saw this demon standing over her. And since that night, she refused to sleep in her bedroom and would actually sleep on her couch in the living room instead. And at this point, I was like putting two and two together, and I asked her, which bedroom are you in? Because there are 3 bedrooms in her apartment as well. And we ended up figuring out that the bedroom that she was seeing demons in, having nightmares in, feeling horrible in, is the room directly above my bedroom. Now, it definitely freaked me out a little bit, but I didn't have any major issues after. And I thought, you know, maybe it was just an isolated incident, just happened to be the bedroom directly under Haley's where she was seeing demons and things. So I kind of put it out of my mind. About 6 months later, I ended up moving out of the apartment and into my own apartment. And flash forward a few years, I actually found this last bit out a couple months ago. I was talking to my best friend, and my best friend Caitlin, she had stayed behind in that same apartment after I had moved out, and she just got new roommates to stay there with her. She said not long after I had left, she was laying in bed at night on her phone when she felt and she heard something start crawling up the foot of her bed. So she could feel something at the base of her bed slowly crawling up towards her until it was laying directly behind her. And she said she could hear it moving and could also feel like the pressure of the mattress moving and the blankets moving as it slowly crawled up towards her. She was too scared to do anything, but she did try to look out of the corner of her eye to see if she could see what it was or if it was a person. Every time she would try and like tilt her head to look, it would move just out of reach. So she just laid there, and eventually it went away. Now, I'm thankful I didn't have that experience, but after talking it over, we both agreed that there was definitely something wrong with that apartment. We didn't have consistent activity. It wasn't like something was always wrong or always happening, but just some weird events that made us uncomfortable. So I don't know if it was the apartment above us that was haunted and we just got like residuals, but definitely not a fun time. Now, my last story is my most impactful, the most memorable for me, and probably the most proof I've had of ghosts or spirits, and honestly, it's partially what's led me into my own personal beliefs today. So this is another story from when I was in college, but this one actually happened earlier than the last story. So this one happened in 2017 when I was a sophomore in college. Me and two roommates had just moved into this townhome apartment that was on campus. Now, just for reference with the townhome, the first floor is a living room and a kitchen and a half bath, and the living room and kitchen were connected by a hallway. So if you were standing on the left side of the living room, you could look down the hallway and see the left side of the kitchen. And the second floor was two bedrooms. There was one large bedroom that I shared with one other person, and then a small bedroom that my other roommate had to herself, and then a full bathroom. So not long after we moved in, we started hearing some things. We heard little knocks and bumps and footsteps. The footsteps were, I think, the main thing. We were on the first floor. It always sounded like someone was walking on the second floor, even when all three of us were downstairs. But we kind of laughed it off and we're like, oh, you know, we have a haunted apartment, and just joked about it. So it did start small at first and then slowly escalate. There were a couple weeks that went by after we moved in where both of my roommates would be gone for the weekend to go visit their families in their hometowns. And on these weekends, I would have the apartment completely to myself. Now, I'm not someone that's scared of being alone or that's bothered by having to sleep by myself or being in a house by myself, but every time that they would leave for the weekend, I would feel like I was being watched. While I was downstairs, while I was upstairs, but especially when I was trying to go to sleep, I could feel this very strong presence standing in the door frame of our bedroom, just staring at me while I tried to sleep. And it was very unnerving, very freaky, and I didn't really know what to do about it. Now, because my roommates would go home so often and I never really went home on the weekends, none of them ever had the same experience that I did. And of course, when my roommates were back in town and they were back at the apartment, nothing would happen. They wouldn't experience anything, I wouldn't experience anything. It would go back to the small knocks and footsteps and noises we would hear. But one night, it was just me and one of my roommates that were home for the weekend, and my roommate was upstairs and I was downstairs, and I was trying to get everything ready so I could go to bed. So I was turning off all the lights, turning the TV off, and I just turned off the kitchen lights and walked into the living room to grab my charger from the wall. And as I'm leaning forward, grabbing my charger and pulling it out of the socket, I hear this click. And when I turn my head, the kitchen lights have turned themselves back on. And for a moment, I'm just kind of frozen. And I really understand what people say when they say frozen in fear, because in that moment, my brain just didn't know how to process what had just happened, because I was very far away from the light switch. I turned it off and I watched it turn back on. And at this point, I was too freaked out. And so I just grabbed my charger, ran upstairs, went to my roommate and told her what happened. And we both agreed to just leave it alone, pretend like it didn't happen, and just leave the lights on for the night. So a week or so goes by, and kind of feeling a little bit better about the apartment again. It was really jarring to see the lights turn back on, but nothing else has happened, and I haven't really felt negativity or anything like that since. Started joking about it, just making light of the situation, because what can I do about it? It was about a week later, I was upstairs with the same roommate that I had told about the lights turning off, and we were just talking about the paranormal experiences we were having and all of the knocks that we kept hearing. And I jokingly knocked on the wall 3 times because we kept hearing these knocking sounds, and I definitely wasn't expecting anything to reply back, but almost immediately we heard these 3 loud knocks reply back, like instantly. I was so surprised and so scared that my legs literally gave out and I fell to the floor, and my roommate jumped back into her room and like shut the door. After a while, my roommate peeked open the door again, and we were just staring at each other in complete shock. We didn't say anything, we just ignored it, went about our day like it never happened, because we were so terrified of what had just happened. Now, just covering the debunking of it, the knocks came from a wall that on one side was our bathroom and on the other side was the hallway we were standing in. It very clearly came from this wall, so we know that it wasn't a wall connected to like a neighboring apartment that someone else could have knocked on. And it was so loud and so jarring that it really just terrified both of us. Now, later that weekend, both of my roommates were out of town again, and so I was home alone in the apartment. And I was very on edge at this point, very aware of the apartment being haunted. I tried to stay out of the apartment and just spend time with friends, but of course, at the end of the night, I had to come back to sleep. Now, as soon as I turned the lights off, I immediately just went on my phone, trying to watch Netflix, trying to watch YouTube, anything to get my mind off of the fact that there was something staring at me in the door frame of the room. But eventually, I did have to put my phone down and try to sleep, but the intensity of the stare was just so much. It felt like there was a physical person there just watching me, and I hated that I could feel the direction of it, because if it just felt like I was being watched in general, that's one thing, but for me to know exactly where it was coming from really, really bothered me. And I honestly don't know where I got the courage from or the idea from, but I remember I just sat up and spoke out loud and said, I don't care if you're here, I don't care if you stay here, but you can't stay here if you're going to keep scaring me, so stop. And it was like a switch flipped and the staring just faded away. That sensation, that paranoia, that presence from the doorframe, it's like it just faded. Like it just slowly went away until everything felt normal again. And I was definitely still paranoid when I was trying to sleep, but I didn't feel that heaviness of that presence again. But after I said that out loud and spoke to the spirit, nothing happened again in that apartment. My roommates never told me of them experiencing anything else. I never experienced anything else. Even the footsteps and the bumps that we would hear pretty much stopped. And so in my mind, I'm wondering if maybe the spirit just wanted to be acknowledged and I did acknowledge it, or maybe it was nice enough to listen and hadn't actually been meaning to scare me. Either way, I'm glad that it stopped because it was getting more and more terrifying for me, but it is definitely the most impactful paranormal experience that I have ever had, and it just lives in my mind. But that's all the paranormal stories that I have for this video. I really did enjoy getting to share these with you. I feel like asking people their paranormal experiences is one of my favorite things to do when I meet a new person. If you'd be interested in hearing any of the other paranormal experiences that I've gone through, feel free to leave me a comment down below and let me know, because I love talking about this stuff. But I hope you enjoyed this video. If you liked it, feel free to leave a like down below. If you want to see more videos like this, or just see more of me in general, feel free to subscribe to my channel, and have a happy Halloween. Bye!